So today's session is about ethical issues in research, and we will also discuss about analytical methods briefly. So before I begin today's session, there is something which I need to discuss. There are some misconceptions which I need to clear, which I observed in last week's discussion question activity. Students seem to be confused when to choose probability method and when to choose non-probability method. So if you're using probability sampling methods, you need to ask yourself these four questions. And you know, answer a clear answer to these four questions is very important. For instance, is total population size known? We saw that we need to know about the total population size if we want to use probability sampling method. So if total population size is not known, it becomes difficult to design probability sampling methods. Second question is that do you have an updated list of population? Now, because probability sampling methods choose subjects on the basis of chance, there needs to be an updated list of populations so you can draw sample subjects from population either randomly through random number generators or systematically. It is necessary to understand that for using any probability sampling method, you need to have an updated list of complete population. All elements of the population should be in that updated list. So if you don't have that updated list, then you should not be using probability sampling method. The third question is that if you are using cluster sampling, you need to ensure that whether all clusters are equally heterogeneous. It is very difficult to determine that all clusters are equally heterogeneous. For instance, I'm teaching research methods course to four different sections. Can they be called as which are equally heterogeneous? It seems like these four sections are equally heterogeneous in terms of gender division, in terms of students majoring in marketing, finance, management, and global businesses. If gender proportion is similar in all the four sections, we can say that all the four sections are, they are equally heterogeneous with respect to gender division. If students majoring in marketing, in finance, in management, in global businesses are found in equal proportion in all four sections, we can say that sample is, all the four sections are equally heterogeneous in terms of students, in terms of student majors. If some students belong to large cities and some students belong to one two city and some students belong to smaller cities, if their proportion is similar in all the four sections, then we can safely assume that all the four sections are equally heterogeneous. So if all these characteristics are found in similar proportion in all the four sections, we can say that our sections have equal heterogeneity. Then I can choose a single section or a cluster randomly and recruit all students of that single section in my sample. So in this particular example, it was easier to establish that there is equal heterogeneity in all the four sections. But in most of the cases, it is not possible. For instance, you cannot treat cities as clusters very easily. Like Beijing and Shanghai, they are two equally big cities, but they are different. They are not equally heterogeneous. And even if they were equally heterogeneous, cluster samples, they require recruiting all members of the cluster in your sample, which is impossible if you're taking whole city population as a cluster. So you need to take into consideration these possibilities if you're using cluster sampling method. Okay, if you're using stratified sampling, you need to ask yourself this question: that are all population groups easily identifiable? And if they are easily identifiable, is updated list of each group available or not? Many students have opted for stratified sampling. Again, if you have updated population list, then you can use stratified sampling. If you don't have updated population list and your population groups are easily identifiable, then go for quota sampling, because you want to ensure that your population groups are represented in your population in same proportion. So quota sampling allows you to represent each population group in your sample, but sample is constituted on the basis of convenience instead of using probability methods. So these were the issues that you need to be clear about while deciding upon using probability sampling methods in your research. So you need to be very clear about these four questions. If you have answer, if you have efficient answers to these four questions, valid answers to these four questions, then the possibility of using probability sampling method is there. But if you don't have updated list of population, if you don't have the total population size is not known, and if your clusters are not equally heterogeneous, then you cannot use probability sampling method, and you have to settle for non-probability sampling method. So this is the misconception which I observed in last week's discussion question activity. I am sure that you will be clear about this misconception now. Okay, today's lecture is divided into two different sections. In first section, we will discuss about ethical issues in business research, and in the second section, we will discuss about analytical methods. We will actually engage in complete analysis from our next sessions. From next week onwards, we will discuss analytical tools in detail. So in this week, I'm just giving you a brief recap of what to expect in next 3 to 4 weeks. So, so let us discuss our first section, ethical issues in business research. So there is a code of conduct that governs the way research is carried out. Overall, ethics is described as doing things in accordance with principles of conduct that are considered correct. Now the question arises that who decide these code of conducts? These code of conducts are established over the years to accommodate the changing values and expectations of those who hold a stake in research. Now, who are stakeholders in research? This generally involves four stakeholders. First, the participants, the respondents in your research. Second, the researcher who is undertaking the whole research process. The third, the funding agencies and bodies who finance the research. Fourth, the beneficiaries of this research, which include policymakers, which include practitioners, which include customers, which include businesses. So taking into consideration the stakes involved of these four stakeholders, an ethical code of conduct in conducting research is established, which must be followed. And unethical practices in research, which are pretty common, they must be avoided. For instance, causing harm to individuals from whom you collected data, breaching confidentiality of respondents, using information improperly, selling information to commercial enterprises, even when you told respondents that it would be used for academic purposes only, and introducing bias in the responses of individuals by forging the data, by manipulating the data. These are all very common unethical practices that are usually done in business research or any kind of research. So let us discuss in detail that what kind of ethical issues they are pertinent to consider when it is related to your participants. First of all, collecting information. Now, why would a respondent give you any kind of information? What kind of liability your respondent has to give you, to provide you any information? A respondent has no liability. A respondent has no responsibility to provide you any kind of information. So before you begin collecting information, you need to keep this in mind that your respondents have no responsibility to give you information. So why would they give you information? You must consider the relevance and usefulness of the research you are undertaking, and you must be able to convince others of the relevance and usefulness of your research. So if you are convinced that your research is relevant, your research is useful, and you can convince other as well that your research is valid, your research is relevant, it is useful, then basically others would bind by responsibility to help you. because if you're not able to convince others, if you cannot justify the relevance of the research you are conducting, you are wasting your respondents' time. So you must be able to convince your respondents that your research is important, whatever you are doing, whatever you are investigating is important. So this will help you collect information from your respondents. Secondly, you need to seek consent from your respondents as well. In every discipline, it is considered unethical to collect information without the knowledge of participants uh, and their willingness. Informed consent implies that subjects are made adequately and sufficiently aware of the type of information you want from them. It is important that consent is given voluntarily to the researcher and without pressure of any kind. So this is very important that the consent must be sought from the respondents before you start collecting data. Third thing is incentivizing your research, giving incentives. Now, this is something which has drawn a divisive understanding among researchers. Some researchers believe that giving incentives is good because giving incentives bind your participants in a psychological contract to respond to your survey or interviews in a serious manner. Okay, but having said that, not all researchers have sufficient funding and resources to offer meaningful incentives to participants to participate in a research. So, some researchers are able to provide incentives to participants in a study because researchers believe that participants are giving their valuable time to the research cause. And that incentive is basically a token of appreciation that you have given your valuable time. This is a token of appreciation. But because not all researchers have this luxury of funding and resources, then all of the researchers, they cannot give incentives. Like you guys, you're conducting research, you cannot possibly give incentives to your respondents to participate in your research because you don't have sufficient funds to conduct this research. This research is only for academic purposes. This research is only for fulfillment of this course requirement. So basically, you don't have research funding. Due to this, divide between those researchers who have funds and those researchers who do not have funds, incentives is a topic which draws a divisive understanding among researchers. Some believe that it is good, but others believe that it does not create a level playing field for the researchers. Anyways, if you are giving incentives, be sure that your respondents are fully aware of the research topic and they are not just responding to your topic just because of they want to get that incentive or that small gift which you have stored for them. Okay, the fourth part is seeking sensitive information. So information sought can pose an ethical dilemma in research as well. Certain types of information can be regarded as sensitive or confidential by some people, and thus they regard it as an invasion of their privacy. So asking for such information, which might be regarded as an invasion of privacy by some respondents, it will upset them, it will embarrass your respondent. So you should be very careful while seeking sensitive information. Possibility of causing harm to participants, especially in experimental research. You need to examine carefully whether their involvement, whether respondents' involvement in your research is likely to harm them in any way or not. So in your research, in social sciences research, it is unethical if the way you seek information creates anxiety or harassment for your participants. So you should be very careful that you should approach your respondents in such a way that it does not create any anxiety, it does not create any harassment for your respondents. Lastly, as a researcher, you must be able to maintain confidentiality of your respondents. Sharing information about a respondent with others for purposes other than research is unethical. Sometimes you need to identify your study population to put your findings into context. Like if you are doing research in WKU, you might need to identify your study population. That your study population is students studying in Vanchukin University. So, in such a situation, you need to make sure that at least the information provided by respondents is kept anonymous. It is unethical to identify an individual respondent and the information provided by him or her. Therefore, you need to ensure that after the information has been collected, the source should not be and it could not be identified. Therefore, I always suggest that you should never ask for the name of your respondent because when you ask the name of your respondent, it is compromising their anonymity. So you should never ask the name of your respondent in your questionnaire. Okay, so this is the research. These are the ethical issues which are related to research participants. But there are some unethical practices which are basically uh, used by researchers, which affect the outcome of the research, which affect the integrity of the whole research process. For instance, as a researcher, you need to avoid bias of any kind. Now, bias on the part of researcher is totally unethical. But bias is different from subjectivity as well. You need to differentiate between biasness and subjectivity. Subjectivity is related to your educational background, your training, your competence in research, and your perspectives in life, your perceptions about things, your philosophy of life. So this is subjectivity. Bias, on the other hand, is a deliberate attempt to hide what you have found in your study or to highlight something disproportionately to its true existence in your findings. So you're trying to hide something which you have found, or you're trying to show something which you have not found. So, you should avoid bias of any kind if you want to become, a good researcher in your field. Secondly, using inappropriate research methodology. A researcher has an obligation to use appropriate methodology in conducting a study. It is unethical to use, deliberately a method or a procedure you know to be inappropriate to prove or disprove something that you want to, such as by selecting a highly biased sample, using an invalid research instrument, or by drawing wrong conclusions from your analysis. So it is very important for you that you should not be using any inappropriate research methodology. So that is why in your assignment number 3, I will be reading your research methodology in detail. So I want to be sure that you are very much clear about your research methods. Otherwise, it means that you're not very sure about the way you are conducting research is appropriate one or not. Okay, third one, incorrect reporting. As a researcher, you have sometimes pressure that your hypothesis, they should be confirmed, they should be accepted, because a hallmark of good research is that what is the common standard nowadays is that your hypothesis must be accepted. If your hypotheses are rejected, it means that your theoretical foundation was weak. Hypothesis is basically your educated guess. If your educated guess is not confirmed, it implies that your prediction was not correct. And if your prediction is not correct, it means that the basis of your prediction, which is your theoretical foundation, it was very weak. So researchers, they have pressure to get their hypothesis confirmed, because if the hypotheses are not confirmed, it give rise to these speculations that their theoretical foundation is weak. Now, as a researcher, you have this pressure on you that you are fascinated by getting your hypothesis accepted. So because you have collected data and you have all the data, researchers sometimes they tend to manipulate the data. They try to correct their reportings of their findings, and they try to manipulate their data to get their hypothesis accepted. So you should avoid doing so. You don't have such pressure in your business research course, so you should avoid this practice, because researchers usually fascinated by getting their hypothesis accepted, and they can do go to any extent. They can manipulate the data. They can do incorrect reporting of their data collection methods or their respondents responses to get their hypothesis accepted. So you as the researcher, you as the research student, you should avoid incorrect reporting. Lastly, inappropriate use of information. Again, this is something which we have discussed before as well. How will the information obtained from respondents be used by the researcher? The use of information in a way that directly or indirectly affects the respondents adversely is unethical. So, you, as a researcher, must act as a good custodian of the information provided by the respondents. If you are not a good custodian and you are using information, if you are, transferring or selling this information to commercial enterprises, which they can use to, manipulate the customers. So such practices, they are not considered ethical in research process. So please try to maintain the confidentiality of your respondent and do not use the information collected in your research process inappropriately. So in short, these are the issues you need to take into consideration while conducting research. If these issues are not taken into consideration, the integrity of whole research process will be questioned and your findings will be considered compromised, which affect the usability of your research. Okay, so this is about the ethics, the ethical aspects of your research. Now we will discuss the analytical aspects of the research. This discussion is relatively lengthy. So when we talk about analytical methods, the first thing you need to keep in mind is that uh, there is a different analytical process for different kinds of data. For instance, if you're collecting quantitative data which is collected from primary sources, it has a different process of analysis. If you're collecting quantitative data from secondary sources, it has a different process. If you're collecting qualitative data, it has a different process. So we will discuss all the three data types and their analysis briefly. So first of all, we will discuss quantitative analysis collected through primary sources. So if you're using questionnaires to collect data, which I believe around 90 to 95% of students are doing so, they are using questionnaires to collect data. So you should be doing this sequence of activities. The first thing you need to do is get your data ready. It is called as data preparation. So before you start testing your hypothesis, it is very much important that you get your data ready. So there are 5 steps in data preparation. The first step is data coding and editing. The second step is checking for normality of your data. The third step is checking for validity of your data. Then you need to check the reliability of your data. And at the end, you need to make indexes and transform your data. So let us discuss all these steps one by one. I just want to remind you once again that this is called as data preparation. So we are doing data preparation now. We have actually not entered in the hypothesis testing stage. Before hypothesis testing, we need to get our data ready. So the first step is data coding and editing. So data coding involves assigning a number to the participant responses so that they can be entered into a database. Now I will demonstrate data coding process next week when we start discussing our software. In your slide, there are 4 questions. So these are the 4 questions that are measuring job engagement. So first of all, we need to assign codes to these questions, and then we will assign codes to these responses. So basically, this is your questionnaire. Your questionnaire look like this, right? So the question number 6 of job engagement is, my job is quite simple and repetitive. So we have coded this question as job engagement 6. Okay. Question number 7 is that your job requires you to use a number of skills, a number of complex skills, and we have coded this question as job engagement 7. Similarly, we have coded the questions of job engagement 8 and job engagement 9. So we are basically not writing the complete question. We are not writing the complete statement. We are just, reducing the complete statement into a code, and that code is easily identifiable. Just by reading job engagement 6 code, I know that this is the sixth question of job engagement variable. Okay, so this is the first thing you need to do. You need to assign codes to your questions. The second thing you need to do is assign code to your responses. Now, the first question was responded as completely agree. Now, in our research tool, we have used 1 to 5. 1 stands for completely disagree, 2 stands for disagree, 3 is for neutral, 4 is agree, and 5 is completely agree. So actually, I recommended you to use 7-item scale, but in this example, we are using 5. That suggestion still upholds. Please use 7-item scale instead of 5-item scale. 7-item scale are more valid and more reliable as compared to 5-item scale. So, so this is a 5-item scale. 1 stands for completely disagree. 5 stands for completely agree. So the first question, job engagement 6. This question is responded by completely agreement by your respondent. So you enter the code 5 here. Similarly, for other questions, we have entered their respective codes, right? So this is coding. First, you transform the questions to their codes, and then you transform the responses to their codes. And each code is placed in the category where it is supposed to be placed. So like the job engagement 6 is answered as 5 because your respondent is agreeing. So this is the first respondent. This is the second respondent. Then we will have a complete list of the our respondents according to their number. Okay. Secondly, during the coding procedure, you need to look after inconsistent responses, which are responses that are not in harmony with other information. A participant in our study might have answered the first question that my job is quite simple and repetitive. It's complete agreement. And also respond to the second question as complete agreement. Now, in this particular situation, let me erase this. Yeah. So the this question, my job is quite simple and repetitive. This is replied as, this is responded as in complete agreement. The second question is opposite to this question, which is my job requires me to use a number of complex or high level skills. Now this is an opposite question because question number 6 is saying your job is simple and repetitive. Question number 7 is basically opposite of this particular question. It says your job is complex, your job involves higher level skills. And if you respond to this question in complete agreement as well, then it means that your responses are inconsistent. The respondent is giving inconsistent response because if you are agreeing with the first statement, you should disagree with the second statement. If you are agreeing with both the statements and strongly agreeing with both the statements, it means that your responses are inconsistent. And these kind of responses, they create trouble for us during our data analysis stage because they reduce the validity of our data, they reduce the reliability of our data. So you as a researcher, you need to take into consideration that you need to discard such responses. Now, this is something which is very important. I know it is very frustrating. It becomes very disheartening for you as a researcher that you put an effort to collect data and you have to discard the response. Sometimes it is possible that you collect 200 responses, but at the end, after removing inconsistent responses, like these particular questionnaires are removed from your data, at the end, you only get around 140 responses. So even after collecting data, your sample size will decrease because you have to discard, you have to delete those responses which have inconsistent answers. If there are inconsistent answers, it means that your respondents have not fully understood your questionnaire, or they have not completed your questionnaire attentively. So in both the cases, it means that that response is not meaningful. That does not add value to your research. So that is why you need to remove those responses. So all the inconsistent responses, you need to identify them in your data coding stage, and you need to remove them from further consideration. The second step is checking for normality of your data. So after data coding and after data editing, the second step is normality. The assessment of the normality of data is a prerequisite for many statistical tests, because normal data is an underlying assumption in parametric testing, in statistical testing. The normal distribution is the most important probability distribution in statistics because it fits natural phenomena. For instance, by natural phenomena, you can take an example of heights. Some people, they are exceptionally taller, other people are exceptionally shorter, but majority of the people, they have average height. Their height belongs to the average height in the population. So you need to take into consideration this important thing, that overall population follows normal distribution. For instance, let me give you an example that in this particular subject, if I want to follow your final score of this particular subject, I want it to follow normal distribution. So it would be like this, that the mean of the class would be 85. So out of 100, 85 is the average score of the class. Okay. 85% is a good score. It means maybe B grade, B plus grade. So majority of the students, let's say out of 30 students, majority of the students, like say 26 students, they have their score, their final score in this particular subject, business research, it falls between 80 and 90, which shows that it is very much closer to the mean. But there are two students which have performed exceptionally well, and they have scored like 95, they have scored like 96, 97 percentage. So they are exceptional performers. On the other hand, there are some students who have performed exceptionally poor, like their score is like around 60, their score is around 50. So this is normal distribution. Luckily for you guys, your university has not asked us to follow normal distribution, because in many universities around the world, it is categorically suggested to the instructors that their marking should follow normal distribution, which means that only 3 or 4 students should be getting A grades, and 2 or 3 students should be failing that subject, and majority of the students should be in that average range, which is like here I have taken 85 as an average. So this is normal distribution, that majority of the population will go with the average characteristic, and only exceptional cases, they will be outliers, and they will be like out of the usual characteristics of the population. So while understanding normal distribution, it is very important to understand standard deviation. Standard deviation, basically, it controls the spread of distribution. A smaller standard deviation indicates that the data is tightly clustered around the mean. So the normal distribution for that data would be taller, like this. Maybe I'm not able to draw better. Like it will be like this. So data is tightly clustered around the mean. Okay, when standard deviation is smaller, it means that data is tightly clustered around the mean, and the normal distribution would be taller. If there is large standard deviation, it indicates that the data is spread out around the mean. So the normal distribution in such case would be flatter. It would be like this. So the normal distribution, which is also called as bell curve, it is dependent upon your standard deviation. Your standard deviation is smaller, it means that your population has very condensed mean, very small mean. It will be condensed around the mean, like the case in the taller normal curve. If your standard deviation is large, it means that the population would be spread around that mean, which is the case with the flatter normal curve. Okay, so we need normal data to conduct statistical tests. Like if you're using questionnaire to collect data, and if your responses are, away from neutral option, and they are basically, concentrated on one end of your scale, then your data will be skewed. Now, let me try to explain you the skewness in the data. So you see that here data is negatively skewed, and in the second case, the data is positively skewed. It could happen, for instance, when, like say, if 30 students in your class, and out of 30 students, I try to create a normal distribution here, and out of 30 students, there are 25 A grades, like say 25 are A grades. So basically, your normal distribution would be like this. It means that majority of your, I have not drawn it properly. I will erase it. Okay, just I'm trying to explain the concept. It means that your data would be positively skewed because the majority of the students, they are scoring, higher grades, and only few students, they are not able to score a good grade. So that won't be called as a normal distribution. Uh, so in business research or any research which involves questionnaire, skewness means that your data is basically concentrated on one side of your questionnaire, like this one. So if you get such responses, this particularly means there is a trouble. That particular respondent is either not interested in filling your questionnaire, and these responses are not really valuable because this is a skewed data. Okay, or on the other hand, if all statements are agreed upon by your respondents, again this the researcher, because it means that your data or your research, the whole process is not valuable because your respondents are concentrated, the responses are concentrated on single end of the scale. And this is something which you need to take into consideration while during your data collection process, because if you get skewed data, your data will not be normal, and you cannot make generalizations from your sample towards your population, and maybe even your hypothesis will not be accepted in that case. So you need to be very much clear that your respondents must not be only targeting one end of the scale, because in that case it will be skewed data, and skewed data does not give you very good results. So how to ensure this? Try to explain the purpose of the research to your respondent. Try to engage your respondent. If you're just trying your respondent to get your questionnaire filled in 1 minute or 2 minutes, you will get such responses like I have discussed here. Okay, the third step is that after you have checked for normality, after you have coded the data and checked for normality, the third step is to check for validity of your data. Now, one of the methods we use to check validity is factor analysis. Factor analysis is a way to condense data. Uh, you know, we use the test of principal component analysis. That is why factor analysis is also called as dimension reduction, because we are trying to condense the data. We reduce the data from items to their dimensions. So the most common technique I just mentioned is principal component analysis. So usually factor analysis determines whether your questions in your questionnaire are measuring the concepts which they are supposed to measure, and they are not measuring any other concept. Secondly, it basically tells you that whether your respondents have same understanding of the concepts which you as a researcher has. So it means that your understanding of the concept and the respondent's understanding of the concept is on same page. Like the food quality here, uh, there are three items to measure food quality: taste of food, food temperature, freshness of the food. So after factor analysis, we shall be able to prove that all these three questions that measure food quality, they are grouped together, they are loaded separately, and all the three questions which are measuring cleanliness, they are grouped together, they are measured separately. Now let me try to give you an example. Consider the second key, this picture in the your slide. Consider this matrix. So here we are measuring basically three variables. NARC stands for narcissism, MACH stands for Machiavellianism, PSYC stands for psychopathy. So basically, these are dark personality traits, and there are 27 questions in our questionnaire, 9 questions to measure each variable. Okay, so each variable is measured by 9 questions. Okay, so for our factor analysis to be valid, we need to be sure that all questions measuring narcissism, they must grouped separately. All questions measuring Machiavellianism, all the 9 questions, they must group separately. All the questions measuring psychopathy, they must, they group separately. So if all these questions they group separately, all the questions measuring narcissism they group separately, it shows that our respondents, they have made differentiation between these three concepts. They have differentiated our variable number one, narcissism, from our variable number two, which is Machiavellianism, from our variable number three, which is psychopathy. Okay, but in this particular case, it shows that the first question of psychopathy, uh, you see, psych 1, the first question of psychopathy, it is in the matrix of, it is in the column of narcissism. The third question of Machiavellianism is, it is in the column of narcissism. The ninth question and the fourth question of Machiavellianism, it is again in the column of narcissism. This is trouble. It shows that your respondent basically was not able to differentiate in these four questions. So your respondent perceived that these four questions are also measuring narcissism, which is a huge trouble for you, because basically your understanding was that the questions which you have adopted to measure Machiavellianism are separate, they are different, and they should be measuring Machiavellianism, but these questions are now measuring narcissism. So your respondents are not able to differentiate between those questions which measure narcissism and those questions which measure Machiavellianism. Now, this shows that this is a trouble. Similarly, when you go towards the Machiavellianism group, here you will find the question number 9 of narcissism. Now, your respondents are not able to differentiate the question number 9 of narcissism with other questions of Machiavellianism. They perceive it similarly. This is again a big trouble for you. Uh, Again, psychopathy, question number 4, question number 3, they are considered as, they are perceived as similar to other questions of Machiavellianism. So, if you want your model to be valid, the questions measuring each concept, they must appear in separate column. Otherwise, it means that your data is not valid. So I will explain this thing in detail during our factor analysis topic, which we will discuss in coming weeks. But which I have observed that there are some basic things that you need to do if you want to understand what is going on in the analysis section. You should be able to know what we have discussed in our last 9 lectures. So simply, switching to the section number 11 or unit number 11 or unit number 10 will not help you. You need to develop understanding. You need to listen to all the lectures, all the recordings which we have discussed so far in this course. Otherwise, you will not be able to understand the analysis section of this course. Okay, so our next, so what do we do with these questions? These questions which are not, which are, disturbing our data, we remove them. We delete these questions. So at the end, we have 27 questions in the beginning. At the end, we might be, left with only 20 questions. So we remove those questions which are problematic, which are not valid. So all those questions which have some sort of validity concerns, we remove them. But there is a limit to it as well. It does not mean that if you have 27 questions, you remove 20 questions, and at the end you have just 7 questions. You cannot do so. There is a limit. Okay, we will discuss that limit. So you can just delete a small portion of questions from your questionnaire. You cannot delete majority of your questions because this will seriously compromise your whole research process. Okay, the fourth step is checking reliability. So after you have established validity for your research, it is necessary to establish reliability of your research instrument. We often use Cronbach alpha for this purpose. It is a measure of internal consistency, uh, which shows how closely related a set of questions are as a group. It is considered to be a measure of the reliability of your research instrument. So typically, the value of Cronbach alpha, it ranges from 0 to 1. The value close to 0 indicates that the items in research instrument, they do not correlate with each other, and hence they are not measuring the same concept, and hence the scale is not reliable. The value closer to 1 shows that items in a questionnaire are strongly correlated and they are measuring the same concept. So the scale is reliable. So here, if you see that we have measured narcissism scales reliability. So we are measuring the reliability of each variable separately here. So if we measure the reliability of narcissism, our variable, it has 9 questions, like I discussed in our last slide. The value of alpha is 0.790, which is very good. This value should be greater than zero point 0.7. Okay, so 0.790 is a very good value. You don't have any reliability concerns. But if you look at this table, you see that it is giving you reliability of each item if it is removed from your scale, if it is removed from your questionnaire. So if question number 1 of narcissism is removed, your reliability reduces to 0.777. So from 0.790, it reduces to 0.77. It means that this question is very important for you, because if you remove this question, the overall reliability of this scale is reduced. Similarly, if you see, all items are equally good apart from question number 9. So if you remove question number 9 of narcissism, your reliability of whole scale will enhance. So it means that if you remove this question, you will have 8 questions to measure narcissism, but your reliability will be like 0.804, which is good, okay, which is better than 0.790. So it is also important for you that narcissism scale is reliable. All the 9 questions, they are considered reliable because the value is good, 0.790. But in our previous step, we saw that narcissism is not really that valid because only question number 2, question number 3, 5, 8, and 4, and 7. These 6 questions were valid. That's it. All other 3 questions, like narcissism 9, it has loaded into another factor of which is Machiavellianism. Narcissism 6, it has loaded to another factor. Narcissism 1, it has loaded to another factor, which is Machiavellianism. So The three questions, other three questions, they are not valid. So you want to remove them from your data. But if you check reliability, it says that all the nine questions are okay. And if even if you don't remove question number nine, still the reliability is okay. So it shows that this particular questionnaire, this particular scale of narcissism, which has nine questions, it is fairly reliable. It is pretty much reliable, but there are some serious validity concerns. So we want our research instrument to be both reliable and valid. So what should we do? This we will discuss in our coming sessions, that how to take care of such issues in our research. Okay, lastly, in our data preparation process, the last step is making indices, transforming your data. Now, if you see this particular process, there are seven questions to measure panic buying. Okay, and here we are taking a weighted average. Each question, like panic 1, panic 2, panic 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all these questions, they are measured by a particular weight, and then they are divided by 7. Okay, so this is not a simple average. Why we are not taking simple average? Because in simple average, each item in your questionnaire is regarded as having equal importance, which is not the case. Each question does not have equal importance. There are some questions who are more important, which are more important as compared to other questions. Like if you discuss the last case here, yeah, here. The question number two of narcissism is the most important question to measure the concept of narcissism, because its weight is highest, 0.746. The question number three of narcissism is the second most important question to measure the concept of narcissism, because it has a weight of 0.711. And then, the value, the importance decreases. So we have taken the weight from your validity process, your factor analysis. We have taken the weight from here. Okay. So similarly, these are the weights which arrange your questions according to their importance. So you want to give weight to these questions according to their importance. And it is very important that whenever you are using a questionnaire, and that questionnaire, that scale has multiple items, like narcissism had 9 questions to measure the same concept. Panic buying has 7 questions to measure the same concept. We need to reduce them to a single value to measure their hypothesis, to test their hypothesis. So if you have 30 items in your question, and there are 3 variables in your questionnaire, and each variable has 10 items, it means that you need to reduce these 10 values per question to a single value. This is what we do in our index part. This is what we do in our data transformation part. We reduce these 10 values to a single value according to their weight. And that weight is established in our factor analysis. These are the weights. Okay. So these weights are established in our factor analysis, and then we will have only a single value. So even if you have 45 questions in your questionnaire, and you have 4 variables, and so, a variable is measured by 12 questions, some variable is measured by 10 questions, another variable is measured by 18 questions, you need to give them a single value. So at the end you will have only 4 values, 1 value per variable. That is the purpose of data transformation. Okay, so this is the last part of your quantitative analysis data preparation stage. Okay, I will take a break here. Any questions so far? I know the concepts are complicated and new for you, but when we will demonstrate this in our software, it is pretty easy. It is it is not that difficult. Any questions so far? Any question, any ambiguity, any problem which is not clear? Okay, so let me continue with the session. Okay, so after preparing your data, the next step is analyzing your data. The next step is hypothesis testing. So there are many tests which can help you in hypothesis testing. Usually we used ANOVA test, t-test, regression test, mediation test, and moderation analysis. So let me give a brief overview of these particular tests. The first test is ANOVA. So ANOVA is basically uh, an abbreviation of analysis of variance. It is used to determine whether there is any statistical significant difference between the means of three or more independent groups. For instance, consider the example in the slide. There are age groups. There are six age groups here, below 20, 21 to 30, and we can continue to above 60. So there are six age groups. So whenever your IV is categorical, like it is being measured on a nominal scale. Okay, so this is the nominal scale. So we discussed about scale. So that is why each thing is related. Like we discussed about scales in our unit number 6 or 7. This is where its application will be very much relevant. So whenever your IV is measured on a nominal scale, okay, and it has more than two response categories, like it has more than two response categories mean that it has six response categories, which means that it has six groups. So whenever your IV is measured on a nominal scale and it has three or more than three groups, we will use ANOVA. Okay, and whenever your IV is measured on a nominal scale and it has only two groups or two response categories, we will use t-test. So this is the basic differentiation between your t-test and ANOVA, which you need to make right in the beginning of analysis. So whenever your IV is being measured on a nominal scale and your IV has three or more than three response categories like age, like income, then you can use ANOVA test. But if your IV is being measured on a nominal scale, like the case here, but your IV has only two response categories, like in the case of gender, we have only two response categories, then we need to use t-test. Okay. So what kind of hypothesis ANOVA tests? So if your hypothesis is like this, then you need to use ANOVA. There are significant differences in different age groups of consumers with respect to their shopping habits. Now, this hypothesis is suggesting that whether consumer buying habits are different for different age groups. So now, if at least two group means out of these six groups are significantly different from each other, our hypothesis will be accepted, as we could say with 95% confidence that at least two age groups are different in terms of their shopping habit. For instance, it is possible that age group 2, which is between 21 and 30 years old consumers, and age group 6, that is above 60 years old consumers, their shopping habits are drastically different from each other, and the means of other groups are same, let's assume, or similar. So it shows that even only if two groups are different to each other, then we can say that there are significant differences in different age groups of consumers with respect to their shopping habits. So we need to conduct an ANOVA test. ANOVA test is very simple, and if our p-value, which is our probability, if it is equal to or smaller than zero point zero 0.05, then we can assume that our hypothesis is accepted. So I will show you this. This is very easy. It is not a rocket science. It is very easy. Don't worry about it. So what is the difference between one-way ANOVA and a two-way ANOVA? A one-way ANOVA only involves a single independent variable which is measured on a nominal scale, whereas whenever there are two independent variables which are measured on a nominal scale, uh, and they have three or more than three groups, we use two-way ANOVA. Like here, we have two independent variables, like one is age, as the second one is income. Both are being measured on a nominal scale. Both have three or more than three groups. It means that we can measure, if our hypothesis is this, if we want to see that our shopping habits are different, the consumer shopping habits are different with respect to their age and with respect to their income, then we can use a two-way ANOVA. If you are interested in finding out whether shopping habits are significantly different in terms of age groups as well as income groups, a two-way ANOVA can be conducted. So this is the difference. In one-way ANOVA, there is only one IV uh, with three or more subgroups, and in two-way ANOVA, there are two IVs with three or more subgroups. So we have already discussed about t-test. Whenever your IV is measured on a nominal scale, and that nominal scale has only two response categories, we use t-test. So what kind of hypothesis is tested on t-test? We can test on t-test, it will test us whether two groups are significantly different from each other or not. If you want to measure whether consumer buying habits are different for males and females, then hypothesis would be like there are significant differences between male and females with respect to their shopping habits. So now if both groups are different, if their mean is different with respect to their shopping, our hypothesis will be accepted, and we could say with 95% confidence that both males and females are different in terms of their shopping habit. So this is a very simple test as well. It is the most easiest test that you could do. Don't worry about it. I will show you. The third test is regression analysis. Now, this is the test which is most commonly used and which you will use as well. It is a statistical test used for estimation of relationships between a dependent variable and one or more independent variables. Using regression analysis, we get a regression coefficient, which tells us that how much change in our dependent variable is produced by an independent variable. So the regression equation is usually used where y indicates the dv, beta indicates your population intercept, beta 1 indicates your slope coefficient, then you have your iv and then your error term. You don't need to calculate regression manually. We have softwares, we can simply calculate through softwares. No need to worry about it. What kind of hypothesis regression tests? So all kind of hypotheses which point towards causal relations are tested by regression. So all kind of hypotheses which which says that there is a A leads to B, or A has a positive impact on B, A has a negative impact on B. Because we have mostly used causal hypothesis, I advise you to go for causal relationships. We have used cause and effect research design, most of us, I think all of us. So it means that for testing such hypotheses, we need regression analysis. So this is very important statistical tool for you. And do not confuse regression with correlation. Both are different. Both are entirely different. So in correlation, correlation makes no distinction between independent variable and dependent variable. And it is only interested in finding out the association between the two variables. So correlation coefficient indicates the extent to which two variables move together. So the extent to which two variables move together is, this information is provided by a correlation coefficient. Regression analysis, on the other hand, makes a clear distinction between independent variable and dependent variable and finds out how much change in dependent variable is produced by an independent variable. In other words, regression describes how an IV is numerically related to the dependent variable, how much a variation in dv is produced by your IV. So this is your very important analysis, regression. Okay, so the fourth analysis which you need to do is mediation analysis. If you don't have mediating variable, you don't need to conduct this analysis. but you need to have an understanding of mediation analysis. It Mediation analysis tests a causal chain of relationships where one IV affects a mediating variable, and in turn, the mediating variable affects the dependent variable. So this chain of relationship is measured in the mediation analysis. So we need to differentiate between full mediation and partial mediation. This is an example of full mediation, our model number A. Here we are assuming that there is no way an IV can impact DV unless and until it goes through, that effect is taken by the mediating variable. So the only way independent variable can affect the dependent variable is through mediating variable. This is called as full mediation. In the partial mediation, we assume that independent variable has direct impact on DV as well. So not only there is an indirect impact through mediator, but there is a direct effect on DV as well. So this is partial mediation. Usually, partial mediation is more used as compared to the full mediation. So if your model look like this, if your theoretical framework look like this, just make this addition in your theoretical framework and check for whether there is a partial mediation or not. Because if your hypothesis is rejected and the only way your IV can reach your DV is through mediating variable, then you can go for full mediation as well. Okay, so how do you calculate mediation effect? So mediation effect is measured by indirect effect. Okay, so the mediation effect is basically that it represents the portion of the relationship between IV and DV that is mediated by mediator. For instance, people with higher incomes, they tend to live longer. So people with higher income, it is an IV, their long life is DV. Okay, but this relationship is explained by the mediating influence of having access to better health care. Okay, so the mediation effect in this particular case will tell us that what portion of relationship between having higher income and living longer is mediated by having access to better healthcare facilities. Now, for instance, you will get a simple numerical value of indirect effect. Now, that numerical value may be like, 8%. Now, that 8% will show you, after all the calculations on software, that 8% will show you that that 8% is basically the portion of relationship between having higher income and living longer, which is mediated by having access to better healthcare facilities. So only 8% mediation effect. It is not much, but it is if it is significant, if the p-value is lesser than or equal to 0.05, then we say that this is a significant mediation because this 8% is a significant contribution. So we will discuss this in detail in our analysis section. Just keep in mind that that this is how it will be done. If you're doing full mediation, you can go with partial mediation as well. And if your hypothesis is rejected from X to Y, then you can resort back to your full mediation. Moderation analysis, again, if you're not using moderator in your theoretical framework, you don't need to conduct moderation analysis, but it is better to have an understanding. So moderation test whether a moderating variable affects the direction and or strength of the relationship between an IV and a DV. In other words, moderation tests for contingent effects when relationship between an IV and DV occurs. So basically, there are two steps to go for moderation. We use hierarchical regression analysis in order to do moderation analysis. There are two steps in it. First of all, we multiply our moderating variable, which is indicated by Z here, with our IV. So our moderating variable is multiplied by our independent variable, and the result is an interaction term. A new variable is created. Okay, and then this interaction term in the second step, this interaction term is related with your dv. This is moderation, and if this result is significant, if its value is below 0.05, then we say that the moderation is occurring. If that is not significant, we say that moderation is not occurring. That is so simple. But there are many students who formulated these such models, like moderating is also, it is a moderating variable as well. A moderator is also acting as an IV here as well. I will, you know, not recommend these models, because you see that in our hierarchical regression, we have already checked and the relationship of we multiplied our IV with our moderating variable, and we check the interaction term with our dv. So you don't need to check this relationship separately. Okay, this relationship will already be checked during your moderation test. So it is not recommended that your moderator is also acting as moderator. Your moderator is also acting as a mediator. Some students have also used the model like this, which is also not recommended. Your moderator is acting as a mediator, as well as uh, you know IV, as well as a moderator. So this variable is serving three purposes. It is acting as a moderator, it is acting as a DV, it is acting as an IV. It is not recommended. It just complicates things. Okay. So this is the data analysis of primary data. Now I will briefly tell you about the quantitative analysis in the secondary data, because there are 2 to 3 students who are also doing quantitative analysis on secondary data. So when you are discussing secondary data, there are 3 important characteristics for secondary data. First of all, your data needs to be transformed when you are using secondary sources to avoid problems in the next stage of the data analysis process. For example, in the secondary data, we often use logarithmic transformation so that the data are more evenly distributed. If, for instance, income data, which are often unevenly distributed, they are reduced to their logarithmic values, the high incomes are brought closer to the lower end of the scale and provide a distribution closer to a normal curve. For instance, if you take this example here, which is given in your slide, this is the per capita income of citizens living in larger cities in the world. If you see Singapore, it has the highest per capita income, which is closer to $60,000 annually. And if you look at Casablanca, which is a city in Morocco, its income is just $5,000 annually. Okay, so see the difference. There's a huge gap between the higher ratio and the lower ratio. In case of primary data, we have only smaller range like 1 to 7 or 1 to 5. But here, this is a huge range. This is a big range. So that is why we need to transform our data. Using logarithmic values, our data falls between -1 and +1. So when we transform our data using logarithmic functions, the higher values like 60, they would be more closer to +1, and smaller values like 5, they would be more closer to these numbers. So you need to take into consideration that you need to transform the data. Sometimes the data is in negative form as well, like the rate of return of companies. If you are calculating that data, in that case as well, you need to transform your data as well. Secondly, you need to take into consideration that whether you will go for fixed effects model or random effects model. Now, fixed effects are variables that are constant across individual cases. These variables, they're like gender or ethnicity, they don't change. Or variables like age, they change at a constant rate over time. Most of the time in primary data, we assume that independent variables or the subjects of our study, they are fixed. Your gender, your ethnicity, it is going to remain constant. Your age, it is also going to change at a constant rate. You cannot turn 80 overnight, right? So Uh, Whenever uh, in secondary data, we need to take into consideration that whether we will go for fixed effects model or random effects model. So you need to understand the difference between them. Let me try to make you understand this with an example. For instance, if we believe that the economic policy of the country, the new economic policy of the country, it has equally affected the return on investment of all the companies listed in stock exchange, we will go for fixed effects model. But usually it is not possible because companies are different in terms of their structure, their goals, their operations, their economies of scale, and their economies of scope. And a new economic policy will not affect all companies in an identical manner. Okay, so therefore random effects model are used in such cases. So if your secondary data also include data from different kind of companies, large size companies, medium size companies, small size companies, and it is measured longitudinally as well, so it include time effects as well, random effects are more justified in such cases. So if you believe that all subjects in your sample are affected in an identical manner, you will use fixed effects. If you believe that all effects in your model are not affected in an identical manner, you will go for random effect test. So this is a simple differentiation between these two models. If you believe that all subjects are affected identically, go for fixed effect. If you believe all subjects are not affected identically, you will go for random effect. Similarly, we test for robustness in our secondary data as well. We need to do robustness tests to establish validity in secondary data. A model is considered to be robust if its dependent variable is consistently accurate, even if independent variable values are drastically changed due to unforeseen circumstances. So different scenarios are created to input different independent variable values. So robustness tests assure quality of your estimations by comparing your baseline model to alternative model specifications and check whether alternative model estimates fall within your baseline models. So this is a small information about quantitative analysis using secondary data. Lastly, we will discuss qualitative data analysis. There are some students, 2 to 3 students, who are using qualitative data analysis. So these are the 4 steps you need to do in qualitative data analysis. The first step is data coding. Qualitative data basically produces large amount of data. So the first step is to reduce the data through coding. Coding is the analytic process through which the qualitative data that you have gathered are reduced, rearranged, and integrated to form theory. So the purpose of coding is to help you draw meaningful conclusions about the data. So the second step is data categorization. It is the process of organizing, arranging, and classifying coding units. So codes and categories can be developed both inductively and deductively. In situations where there is no theory available, you must generate codes and categories inductively in the data. This is called as grounded theory, which we discussed in our unit 6 as well. In many situations, however, you will have a preliminary theory on which you can base your codes and categories. In these situations, you can construct an initial list of codes and categories from the theory. And if necessary, you can change or refine these during the research process as new codes and categories emerge inductively. The third step is data display. It shows that it involves taking your reduced data and displaying them in an organized and condensed manner. If you recall our unit number 2, we discussed a qualitative research paper, copy size, and there the data was organized around 3 columns. The first column was themes, the second column was the principal nodes, the third column was child nodes. So the first column was themes, the second column was principal node, the third column was child node. So they displayed the data in an organized and in condensed manner. The last step is drawing conclusions. It is the final analytical activity in the process of qualitative data analysis. It is basically the essence of data analysis that at this point, you answer your research questions by determining what identified themes stand for, by thinking about explanations for observed patterns in your data and relationships in your data which you have observed, or by making contrast and comparisons in your data. So if you're conducting qualitative data analysis, then you need to follow this particular pattern. Uh, for quantitative data, I have explained in detail. So this is it for today's session. Any questions so far before I discuss your this week's DQ activity? Any question regarding the topics which we have discussed? Anything which is not clear, which requires further explanation, further clarification? Okay, so let me continue with explanation of this week's DQ activity. So you need to select a research paper which has discussed ethical issues faced in conducting research. So your research paper should point towards this particular situation, ethical issues faced in conducting research. Give complete reference of that article you selected. Please ensure that the article is not selected by any other student who has posted comment before you. Okay, so discuss the issues raised in that research paper. This is the requirement number one. The second requirement is that how did you ensure that such issues were minimized while conducting research for your research project. Okay, so you need to categorically discuss these. The last part is evaluate the responses of three other students. Are you satisfied with their explanation and understanding of ethical issues in business research? So you need to answer these three particular questions for your this week's discussion question activity. The point of consideration is that you must select that research paper which discuss some ethical issues faced in conducting research. Give complete reference, and that research paper must not be selected by any other student. Okay, who has posted comment before you? And lastly, your coming assignment is your final research project, which constitutes, a major point of your grade. It needs to follow a format. I will give you a template. I will give you a template that what you should cover in each part. So you should follow that template. An important thing to keep in consideration is that the deadline. The deadline at the moment is 15 December. I'm not sure that what date would be given to us to submit our final grades. For instance, if the final grades date is given to us, the submission of final grades is like if 30 December is the final date, then I can push this limit towards like let's say 18 or 20 December. So I'm not sure about the final submission date. Usually we are required to submit our final grades by before Christmas. So that is why I should have at least 1 week to check your assignments, to read your research reports. So that is why on the safer side, 15 December deadline is given. The word limit should be 4,000 to 4,500 words because it is a complete research report. The plagiarism limit is 15%. Again, this is negotiable because there will be a lot of self-plagiarism from your assignment number 2 and assignment number 1. You should follow these particular formatting guidelines. Please strictly follow APF format, and you should be writing your research report seriously because this will tell me that how much understanding you have of this particular subject, how much you have learned from this particular subject, because this is basically a litmus test of your understanding of your research concepts. So any question about research report or your discussion question or this week's session? Any ambiguity? Anything which is not clear? which requires further clarification? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Please go through the recording once again. And if any question arises in your mind, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you very much. Bye.